English translation 499th contact. Monday, 9th August 2010, 16:32 hours.
Nice to see you. Welcome and greetings, comrade.
Another thing I have not heard from you. Greetings, dear friend.
You were just here. Has something come up that we need to talk about?
Yes, that is the case.
Can we hold off on that because I want to ask you something before I forget again?
You can bring up your question.
Thanks. We have already talked about the fact that 300 years of medieval history and the history of the Emperor Charles the Great is a falsification. Emperor Otto III and Pope Sylvester II are said to have invented and spread a huge falsification of 300 years of medieval history. It is said that 300 years were simply skipped so that Otto III could have been emperor in the year 1000 AD. Look here. I found this in a magazine.
Our 300 years of medieval history a falsification.
Can 300 years of human history just disappear like that? Like in a black hole? The year 614 AD is not followed by 615, but by 911. The 297 years in between are pure invention, says a circle of medieval experts. In order to do this, hosts of scribes must have forged documents and manuscripts, all by order of Emperor Otto III and his accomplice, Pope Sylvester II. The events and persons of these almost 300 years are said to have been invented by the two of them, including even Charlemagne. Today, we would therefore not write the year 2010, but 1713. It would be the greatest forgery of mankind. But for what purpose would the Emperor and Pope have created this conspiracy? What is the real truth of this theory? The distrust of some historians is understandable. The documents between 600 and 900 are not only meagre, but also contain numerous inconsistencies. Why does nobody know the exact place of birth and birthday between 742 and 748 of Charlemagne? After all, this emperor is considered the father of Europe. He plays the most important role in the national history of France and Germany. Even more mysterious is his death around 814. Why has the tomb of the great ruler of the West never been found? Why had his body only been buried? After his death, Charlemagne became so idealized that he increasingly resembled the legendary figure of Arthur. Divine powers were attributed to him, and with the help of the Pope, he defeated all his enemies. No other medieval king or emperor became so much the subject of legends. But there are even more mysteries. Why are there not archaeological finds from that time? Why were no buildings completed between 614 and 911? There are countless historical sources that cannot be clearly assigned, false reports and illegible documents. But why should Otto III and New Year's Eve too have engineered this massive forgery? For a very banal reason, historians say. Emperor Otto III wanted to be the emperor of the new millennium, but unfortunately he lived around the year 700, so he simply invented 300 years more, and in the year 1000 he was emperor. Pope Sylvester II supported him in this, and thus became the Pope of the millennium. 5 centuries later, Pope Gregory XV concealed the invented time with a calendar reform, so everything was back to normal. This introduction of a new calendar was also the first indication of a forgery by the medieval experts. Nevertheless, there remains skepticism as to whether such a comprehensive forgery is even possible.
What do you say to this?
We have already talked about this. Moment. It was at our 288th official conversation on the 23rd of July, 2000. Even then I told you that this claim was nonsense. Further, I can only explain that Charlemagne was recorded in our annals by my great-great-grandfather Hylock in long explanations, which also includes an extensive documentation of the approximately 300 years, which are supposed to have been invented, as the would-be medieval historians on Earth fantasize. The fact that the earthly chronicles and records of that time are very deficient is due to many political and religious turmoil, during which many handwritten records of history were destroyed, as these turmoil also prevented the completion of many buildings for about 3 centuries. But what is known from the earthly annals today still corresponds to what has been, although it must be said that certain writers also made erroneous records that still exist today. And what finally happened to Charlemagne is something I should not speak openly about for certain reasons.
Then I do not want to know either. I am interested in when your great-grandfather Hylock actually died.
However, I am allowed to give information about it if you want. You are confused about the lineage of my paternal ancestors. Hylock was not my great-grandfather, but my great-great-grandfather. According to the earthly calendar, he became 1,463 years old and died in the year 98 before the Christian calendar. His old age was and is as extraordinary for us as it is for Earth humans, when a human being reaches an age of about 125 or 130 years, which is also very rare. He was my great-great-grandfather on my father's side, and he sired my great-grandfather Gabriel even at an advanced age. He also reached an extraordinary age of 1,402 years. Great-grandfather Gabriel then begat on earth with Maria Emmanuel, which is familiar to you. He also begat Ezekiel, my grandfather, one of whose sons was my father Svayath. On my mother's side, there are, of course, also ancestors, but this is certainly not of great interest for you, except perhaps that in the family line of my recently deceased partner there was also an ancestor, a great-grandfather named Hylock, who passed away at the age of 1,161 years. I do not want to tell you more about these matters, so I ask you not to ask any more questions about them.
And the Quetzal spirit form of today revived your great-grandfather, Gabriel, I realize that. But what you say about your great-great-grandfather and your great-great-grandfather, Gabriel, I made a mistake when retrieving and writing down the conversation reports. I somehow remember that Hylock was your great-grandfather. But now you say that he was your great-great-grandfather, so I probably only wrote great-grandfather in the conversation reports.
I want to check that in a moment. Correct. Here at the 361st Conversation Report of the 24th of June 2004, already in Volume 9, page 179, you can read great-grandfather instead of great-great-grandfather. Then, here at the 453rd Contact Conversation of the 14th of July 2007, after Toleda's 15th sentence, in the list your performance regarding Hylock is not correct, so this has to be changed. It must mean grandfather Ezekiel. Ta will be 1,118 years old, etc. in the right field must be the note. Ezekiel the mediator. What can still be corrected, that is to say, what still has to be done for the sake of correctness. On the other hand, my given explanation should then suffice.
Unfortunately, mistakes do happen all the time.
That is correct. But on the one hand, very little happens with regard to the transcripts of our conversations. And on the other hand, errors can probably not be avoided when I consider how difficult it is for you to recall the conversations you have had in a concentrative way. It amazes me again and again how you are able to do everything and how very few mistakes are really made by you.
Once again, I would like to bring the language to the so-called regressions to past lives that are done by certain charlatans, etc., by putting people under hypnosis and then having some crazy regressions that are not in accordance with the truth of past lives. Recently, I had another question about this. explaining the fact that hypnotized people usually only fantasize about recollections or reproduce any of their own memories or those of other human beings who have read, experienced, or heard them in the present life, etc. This charlatan hypnotizing and recalling usually happens precisely because the hypnotist does not have sufficient skills to put the hypnotized person into a trance state through which he can retrieve information from his own memory banks. With sufficient abilities and the necessary skills and knowledge, such information regarding one's own former persons can also be retrieved through a meditative state, as it is also possible through hypnosis, when there is a real expert in hypnotic abilities. As I am not sufficiently engaged with this to be able to orientate myself about what is being done in this field on Earth, I would like to ask you if you know more about this. And if in the meantime, as we have talked about these things, there are now specialists in hypnosis who are able to bring about real regressions by retrieving information from the memory banks. I am not referring to the practices carried out by well-known charlatans for the sake of money, but I'm thinking of really good professionals in hypnosis who are capable of influencing their hypnotized persons in such a way that they can retrieve real and truthful information from their own memory banks.
It is a number of years since we last had a private conversation on this subject. And since we are also observing these things you mentioned according to our clarification work, as you know, I can tell you that in the meantime it has become apparent that a few specialists in hypnosis have developed, who are able to make real regressions by guiding those they hypnotize in such a way that they can retrieve true information from their own memory banks. However, the number of those who are capable of hypnosis is not great, so that we cannot speak of a general progress in these matters.
That's already enough. Thanks. Then I would like to ask you another time the same thing, which we have already talked about several times privately. I have also discussed with your daughter Simya Se and with Quetzal, and they said the same thing as you. It concerns the colonization in a running sentence, about which I would have liked to hear from you again what your language and writing experts say about it. Unfortunately, the conversations about this have also never been recorded in writing, because we always discussed everything privately. But now it seems to be necessary that we record the whole thing once in writing, exactly about whether we have to continue in a running sentence with a colon in small or large letters.
Of course, I can gladly reproduce the explanation of our linguists and scribes. They clearly state that in written form, even if there is a colon in a running sentence, it must also be continued in capital letters. A new sentence also begins in a running sentence with colonization, and it must in any case begin with a capital letter. A lowercase letter may only be used if the sentence is interrupted by a comma or a semicolon. If, however, a sentence is interrupted by a colon, then only an uppercase letter may be used, because the continuation of the sentence forms a separate and independent part of the sentence.
Wow, that is well said. My attempt to explain this is miserable. But I still have a question regarding the oracle site of Delphi in ancient Greece. Simya Se, your daughter, once said, when our conversation was about Delphi, whose ruins I visited in the 1960s, that Pythia, respectively the priestess of the oracle of Delphi, called Python, was always under the influence of gases rising from the earth. It was only through these gases that she fell into a trance and prophesied. Simya Se also said that the prophecies of Pythia were allegedly written down and sealed in small double-sided clay tablets, so to speak, little books of prophecy made of clay tablets, but only in connection with political matters, etc., so that the prophecies were also correct. The priests of Delphi secretly opened these clay little books of prophecy, in which the priests had not written anything in the first place, in order to write them in the little books of prophecy, and then seal them again only later, when certain political or other important events had taken place. The priests had spies, informers and connections all over the country, through whom everything was first clarified with regard to political, military, and other events, before the priests unsealed the two-part clay tablets, which in reality had nothing to write on, opened them, and then inscribed and resealed them with the data experienced by the spies and informers. Only after this were the seals officially broken under high witness, and the alleged prophecy of Pythia officially announced. The Pythia, respectively the oracle priestess, Simyase explained, had fallen into a trance state of confusion due to the gases rising from the earth, and had also made confused prophecies and interpretations, which actually did not make any correct sense. This is how I remember your daughter Simyase's explanation.
Her explanation was correct because everything actually happened as her explanations explained. With regard to the various natural gases through which the priestess fell into a state of trance, they escaped directly from the earth into the area of the oracle room, the main gas form being ethylene. This is a simple unsaturated hydrocarbon, as it is present in the illuminating gas, for example.
Thanks for the explanation, but I can't get much use out of it because I'm not familiar with it. All that is clear to me is that the Delphi priests cheated and lied to human beings and treated them like fools and idiots. So they did the same as it has been usual since ancient times with all cults of all kinds, and as the religious men, sectarians and priests, etc., have always done with their believers, and also still do it today.
This is a fact. The whole thing actually happened the way my daughter Simyase explained everything to you.
Perhaps I should explain that the oracle, which was called oraculum in Latin, was actually a place of speech where people spoke and prayed. There were many such oracle sites in Greece, but when we talk about the Great Oracle, we are referring mainly to the site at Delphi in Greece, where certain seers and priests made mysterious and ambiguous statements and interpretations, and dark hints about things and dreams, and prophesied prophecies. Correctly seen, then, the whole thing was based on fortune-telling and the like, as is still the case today, since countless fortune-tellers and soothsayers, card clubs and dubious media tell nonsense and also pull the wool over their followers and believers who are addicted to them in order to frighten them with their nonsense and bollocks. Nowadays, everything concerning fortune-telling is such that the fortune-tellers who beat the cards, read the future from the coffee grounds, make their pendulum play and do all sorts of other mysterious things, have even better psychological knowledge than the fortune-tellers of ancient or other ancient times. This way they can pull the worms out of the noses of their believing customers without being noticed by those who are guided by them, who then take everything at face value and believe what they are told, fortune-telling.
Unfortunately, this nonsense will continue for a long time, because only when Earth humans find their way to the real reality and truth and free themselves from any belief, will they be able to free themselves from the whole that is to be called nonsense.
Until then, since it will be so that people live according to reality and its truth, there will still be a lot of water flowing down the Rhine, if it has not dried up by then.
In any case, the time will be very long. But now I should talk about why I came here, because I have to go back soon and devote myself to my other tasks.